It had been raining in Polson for 2 days. Small drops drummed on the windshield of the police car, and the wipers couldn't keep up, smearing the water into a thin film. Detective Lamont Price peered into the darkness of the street, trying to make out the house numbers. The navigator announced their arrival in a mechanical voice, and Price turned off the engine. The Davis family's small, one-story house looked unremarkable, weathered siding, an old roof, and a front yard overgrown with weeds. Now, this modest house was surrounded by yellow police tape, and a small crowd of onlookers had gathered around it, hiding under umbrellas. Price got out of the car, pulled the hood of his raincoat over his head, and headed for the house. Puddles on the driveway reflected the flashing lights of the police cars. At the entrance, he was met by a young patrolman with a notepad. "Detective Price?" he asked, extending his hand. "Officer Jackson. I was the first to respond to the call." "What do we have?" Price shook the outstretched hand briefly and got straight to the point. Double homicide. Kieran and Shanti Davis, husband and wife. The bodies were discovered by the woman's brother, Trevin Banks, at approximately 9:30 p.m. He was supposed to stop by his sister's place tonight. Price nodded and entered the house. It was warm inside, but the smell of death had already spread throughout the rooms. Medical examiner Rita Ngozi, a petite woman with short dreadlocks, was bent over the man's body in the living room. "Lamont," she nodded without looking up from her work. "Male, approximately 35 years old. Death was caused by a strong blow to the back of the head with a blunt object. Judging by the body temperature and rigor mortis, death occurred between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. Murder weapon? Nothing yet, but the shape of the wound suggests something heavy with an uneven surface. Possibly a candlestick or a statuette." Price surveyed the room. Nothing unusual. A worn sofa, an old TV, a shelf with books. There was minimal struggle, only an overturned coffee table indicated some movement. "And the woman?" "In the bedroom." Rita nodded toward the hallway. "She's in much worse shape." The detective walked down the short hallway and found himself in a small bedroom. The woman's body lay by the bed in a pool of dried blood. Her white t-shirt was soaked with blood, and numerous stab wounds covered her chest and stomach. "My God," Price said quietly. "How many stab wounds?" The technician photographing the body replied without looking up from his work. 17 so far. Clearly a crime of passion." Price slowly walked around the room, trying not to disturb any evidence. On the bedside table was a photograph of a married couple smiling and embracing each other against the backdrop of a lake. Next to the photograph was a package of antidepressants. "Did anyone find the murder weapon?" "A kitchen knife," replied one of the forensic technicians. "It was lying next to the body. It's already been bagged as evidence." Price returned to the living room, where Kieran's body was now being placed in a black bag. He noticed family photos on the wall and moved closer. In one of them, Shanti had a noticeably rounded belly. "Was she pregnant?" he asked Rita. "No, not now. But judging by the marks on her body, she had a miscarriage recently, maybe a month or 2 ago." Price nodded thoughtfully and went outside. The rain was getting heavier. A tall man, with a lost look on his face, was standing by the police tape, his clothes soaked through, but he didn't seem to notice. "Trevin Banks?" Price asked, approaching him. The man nodded slowly. "I'm Detective Lamont Price. I need to ask you a few questions." "I already told the patrol officers," Trevon replied quietly. "I came to visit my sister. The door was unlocked. I went in and—" His voice faltered. "Did you visit your sister often?" "For the last 2 months, yes. She was depressed after her miscarriage. I tried to come at least once a week, brought her groceries, helped around the house." "Tell me about her relationship with her husband." Trevon tensed. "Kieran. He was a normal guy. Until recently. Shanti said they were having problems, but she didn't go into details." "What kind of problems?" "I don't know exactly. She didn't want to talk about it, but after the miscarriage, things got worse. She blamed herself, even though the doctors said it happens. Kieran seemed to be supportive, but..." He paused. But something changed between them. They hardly spoke in front of me. Shanti cried a lot." Price jotted down the information in his notebook. "When was the last time you saw your sister alive?" 3 days ago. I stopped by to bring her some headache medicine. Was Kieran home? No, he was working the second shift. Trevon suddenly swayed and Price supported him by the elbow. You need to sit down. Let's go to my car. In the car, Trevon calmed down a little. Price turned on the heat and continued questioning him. Where did Kieran work? At the Johnson lumberyard. He was a loader. He worked there for about 5 years. And Shanti? She was a cashier at Food King, but she took time off after the miscarriage. The doctor prescribed her antidepressants, and she hardly left the house. When did the miscarriage happen? 2 months ago. She was 5 months pregnant. It was their first child. They were really looking forward to it. Trevon's voice faltered again, and he fell silent. Price gave him time to collect himself. Did Kieran have any enemies? Maybe conflicts at work? I don't know. We weren't particularly close. He was a normal guy, but... Trevon faltered. But lately, I've started to suspect that he was cheating on Shanti. I didn't have any proof, just intuition. He started coming home late from work, often taking extra shifts, which he hadn't done before. And the smell, he sometimes smelled like women's perfume. Price made another note in his notebook. Did you talk to his sister about this? She was already in a bad way. I didn't want to hurt her more. I understand. Where do you work? At Paulson's auto repair shop. I'm a mechanic. Price asked a few more questions, but Trevon couldn't provide any useful information. The detective left him his business card and let him go, asking him to stay in town. When he returned to the house, Price found that both bodies had been taken away and forensic experts were still collecting evidence. He decided to talk to the neighbors. The nearest house belonged to an elderly couple, the Winstons. Mrs. Winston, a plump woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun, gladly invited the detective in for a cup of tea. Such a tragedy, detective. They were such a lovely couple, she lamented as she poured the tea. Of course, things had changed recently. What exactly changed? Well, after Shanti lost her baby, she became a recluse. She hardly ever left the house. And Kieran, he started coming home later and later. Sometimes I saw him coming home at almost midnight. And you know, she lowered her voice, I think he was seeing another woman. Why do you think that? A woman's intuition, detective, and also... She lowered her voice again. A couple of weeks ago, I saw a car pull up to their house. A young woman was driving, very attractive. She and Kieran talked in the car for almost an hour. Shanti was at the doctor's. Her brother had taken her there. Can you describe this woman? Tall, slim, with short hair, dark-skinned like them. I didn't get a good look at her face, but she looked striking. Did you notice the car? A blue sedan, not new. I can't tell you the model, I don't know much about cars. Price thanked Mrs. Winston and questioned several other neighbors. The story was grim. After the miscarriage, Shanti had fallen into depression, and Kieran may have been seeking solace elsewhere. Returning to the Davises' house, Price noticed that the forensic team was finishing up. One of them approached the detective. Detective Price, we found something interesting in the bedroom. He handed him a plastic bag with a small earring inside. This doesn't belong to the victim. Her earrings were different, and both are still here. This one was under the bed. Price examined the find carefully. It was a simple silver earring with a small stone. Okay, send it in for analysis. It might tell us who was in the house on the day of the murder. It was midnight when Price finally finished examining the crime scene. Before leaving, he walked around the house once more, trying to imagine what had happened there a few hours earlier. Who killed this couple, and why? Was it a random robbery? Unlikely. The valuables were still there. Revenge? Perhaps. Or was it somehow connected to Kieran's alleged infidelity? Stepping outside, Price noticed that the rain had finally stopped. He took a deep breath of the damp night air and headed for his car. Tomorrow would be a difficult day. He needed to talk to Kieran's colleagues at the sawmill and find out more about his possible affair. As he drove home through the deserted streets of Polson, bits of information swirled around in his head. Miscarriage, depression, infidelity, a strange earring, 17 stab wounds, a clear sign of rage or jealousy. Something told him that this crime wasn't committed for financial gain. There were strong emotions behind it. Stopping at a red light, Price looked at the photo taken at the crime scene. Shanti Davis, who had recently been expecting a baby, now lay in a pool of her own blood. Who could have wanted her dead? If the target was Kieran, why kill her too? A witness? Or was it all much more complicated? The light turned green and Price slowly pulled away. He knew he wouldn't be able to sleep properly for the next few days. This case would not let him rest until he found the killer. The morning greeted Polson with clear skies. After several days of continuous rain, the sun seemed especially bright, reflecting off the puddles on the asphalt. Detective Lamont Price parked his car in the parking lot of Johnson's Sawmill, the largest business in town. The two-story red brick administration building contrasted with the gray workshops and warehouses behind it. Price adjusted his tie and went inside. At the reception desk, he was greeted by a middle-aged woman with neatly styled hair. "How can I help you?" she asked with a professional smile. "Detective Lamont Price," he said, showing his badge. "I'm investigating the murder of Kieran Davis. I need to talk to his boss and colleagues." The woman's smile faded. "Yes, we've heard a terrible tragedy. Kieran was a good worker. His immediate supervisor is Roy Wilkins. He's in charge of warehousing. I'll call him right away." A few minutes later, a stocky man in work clothes entered the reception area. His handshake was firm and his gaze wary. "Roy Wilkins," he introduced himself. "Let's go to my office, Detective." Wilkins' office was small and functional, a desk covered with papers, a few chairs, and a staff schedule on the wall. Price sat down and took out his notebook. "How long has Kieran Davis worked for you?" 6 years, Wilkins replied. "He started as a loader, then became a shift foreman. Hard-working guy, no complaints." "When did you last see him?" "The day before yesterday. He worked the second shift from 2 to 10. "Did he leave on time?" Wilkins frowned slightly. "Yes, at about 10:15. We're strict about that. Overtime is paid separately, so we keep track of the time." Price made a note in his notebook. "Was Kieran supposed to work on the day of the murder?" "No, it was his day off." "Tell me, Mr. Wilkins, how would you describe his relationship with his coworkers?" Wilkins shrugged. "Normal working relationship. He wasn't the life of the party, but he didn't look for trouble either. He was a professional." "Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior lately?" The warehouse manager paused, as if weighing his answer. "Maybe. After his wife had a miscarriage, he became more withdrawn. Sometimes he would ask to leave early or, on the contrary, stay for extra shifts. It seemed to me that he was trying to distract himself from his problems at home." "Did Kieran have any particularly close relationships with any of his colleagues?" Wilkins hesitated again. "Well, he got along fine with everyone, but—" He lowered his gaze to the table. "But—" Price leaned forward slightly. "There was one employee, Aisha Okoye. They often had lunch together, and I sometimes saw them talking during breaks. But I don't get involved in my employees' personal lives unless it affects their productivity." "Is Aisha Okoye working today?" "Yes, she's on the first shift until 2 p.m. She should be in Warehouse B." Price thanked Wilkins and asked him to show him to the warehouse. On the way, the manager explained the specifics of the company's work, but the detective listened half-heartedly, mentally preparing himself for his conversation with Aisha. Warehouse B was a huge room with tall racks filled with lumber. Forklifts scurried between the rows and workers in protective helmets checked delivery notes. Wilkins called out to one of them, "Hey Jay, where's Aisha?" "At the far end, doing inventory," replied the worker, looking curiously at Price. They found Aisha Okoye in the far corner of the warehouse. A tall, slender woman with short hair pulled back in a tight ponytail was making notes on a tablet. Hearing her name, she turned around, and Price noticed her face tense for a moment at the sight of the stranger. "Aisha, this is Detective Price," Wilkins introduced him. "He's investigating what happened to Kieran." Something flashed in the woman's eyes that Price couldn't quite place. Fear? Surprise? But she quickly regained her composure. "Of course, I'll answer any questions you have." Wilkins left them alone, and Price suggested they find a quieter place to talk. They stepped out onto a small loading platform where it was quiet and deserted. "Miss Okoye, please accept my condolences. I understand you were close to Kieran Davis." Aisha tensed slightly. "We were colleagues. Just colleagues? She held his gaze. What exactly do you want to hear, detective? The truth, Ms. Okoje. You do know that this is a double murder investigation, don't you? Any information could be critical. Aisha looked away and gazed at the forest stretching into the distance. We were more than colleagues. We had a relationship. Tell me more. She took a deep breath. We started dating about 8 months ago. It was just a fling at work. Nothing serious. Kieran was married, I knew that. But then things got complicated. How so? I fell in love, she admitted quietly. And Kieran, I thought he felt the same way about me. He said his marriage had long since become a habit, that he and Shanti were just coasting along. But then Shanti got pregnant, Price suggested. Aisha nodded. Yes, Kieran was in shock. He wasn't planning on having children, at least that's what he told me. But when it happened, he started to pull away from me. He said he had to be with his family. We continued to see each other, but less often. And when Shanti had the miscarriage? Aisha's eyes flashed, but she quickly controlled her emotions. Kieran was devastated. I don't know if it was because of the loss of the baby or because of his wife's condition. He said we needed to end our relationship, that Shanti needed his support. That was about a month ago. And you agreed? Aisha smiled bitterly. Did I have a choice? He made his decision, I had to respect it. But you kept in touch? At work, yes. It's impossible to completely avoid someone when you work in the same place, but our personal meetings stopped. Price watched her face closely. Aisha spoke calmly, but there was pain in her eyes, real or well acted. That remained to be seen. Where were you yesterday between 5 and 8 p.m.? She flinched slightly at the direct question. At home, alone, watching a series on Netflix. Can anyone confirm that? Number Y, live alone. What about your phone? Did anyone call you? No, I was just relaxing. Price nodded, making a note. Do you have a car, Miss Okoje? Yes, a blue Ford 2000 model. The Davises' neighbors saw a similar car near their house a few weeks ago. Was that you? Aisha visibly tensed. Yes. I went to see Kieran to talk. We sat in the car. What did you talk about? I wanted to know if it was really over between us. Kieran was adamant. He said he had to save his marriage. And how did you react? I was upset, of course. But I understood him. In the end, he chose his family. That's noble. Price noticed her fingers tremble as she uttered the last phrase. Do you wear earrings? The question caught Aisha off guard. Yes, sometimes. Why? Can I see the ones you're wearing? She touched her earlobes in confusion. I'm not wearing earrings today. I don't wear them at work. They might get caught on something. At home? What kind of earrings do you usually wear? Different ones. I have several pairs. Are any of them silver with a small stone? Aisha froze, turning slightly pale. Yes, I do. Why do you ask? Just checking. We found a similar earring at the Davises' house. Perhaps you dropped it during one of your visits. I wasn't inside their house. We always talked in the car. Price noted this obvious lie. The neighbors had only seen Aisha at the Davises' house once, and that was in the car. But the earring suggested that she had been inside the house after all. Miss Okoje, do you understand the seriousness of the situation? If you're hiding something... I'm not hiding anything! Her voice rose slightly. Yes, I had an affair with Kieran. Yes, I was upset when he ended it. But I didn't kill him. Or his wife. I'm not accusing you, Price replied calmly. I'm just trying to establish the facts. Have you ever been to their house? Aisha hesitated, clearly struggling with herself. Once, about 3 months ago, Shanti was at her parents' for the weekend. Kieran invited me over. We spent the night together. And you could have lost your earring then? Maybe. I didn't notice it was missing. Price decided to change the subject. What do you know about Shanti's brother, Trevon Banks? Not much. Kieran mentioned him a couple of times. He said he had problems with the law. I think he was in for robbery or something like that. Kieran didn't get along with him very well. Why? Trevon thought Kieran wasn't good enough for his sister. At least that's what Kieran said. Price continued asking questions for about another half hour. Aisha answered fairly coherently, although she sometimes got confused about dates. She insisted that she hadn't seen Kieran outside of work since he ended their relationship a month ago. After talking to Aisha, the detective interviewed several of Kieran's colleagues. They all confirmed that Kieran and Aisha clearly had a special relationship. They often spent time alone during breaks and sometimes left work together. But in the last month, everything had changed. They hardly spoke to each other, and Kieran seemed depressed. Leaving the sawmill, Price glanced back at Aisha, who had returned to work. Something about her story didn't add up. If the relationship had ended a month ago, why did she look so confused and depressed? And why did she lie about never having been to the Davises' house? The next step in the investigation was to check on Trevon Banks. Price returned to the station and requested his file. As Aisha had said, Trevon had a criminal record, 2 arrests for fighting and 1 stint in prison for shoplifting 5 years ago. After his release, he seemed to have settled down. He got a job at an auto repair shop, paid his taxes, and stayed out of trouble with the police. Officer Jackson, the young patrolman who had met Price at the crime scene, popped into the office. "Detective, the medical examiner sent a preliminary report on the Davison case." Price took the folder and quickly scanned its contents. The causes of death were confirmed. Kieran died from a severe blow to the back of the head with a blunt object, Shanti from multiple stab wounds. The time of death was between 5:30 and 7 p.m. Traces of women's lipstick were found on Kieran's neck. He may have been with someone before he died. Only Shanti's fingerprints were found on the knife. The killer was probably wearing gloves. Price tapped his pen thoughtfully on the table. So, Kieran may have been with a woman before he died. Aisha claimed she was home alone. It was impossible to verify her alibi. The detective decided to visit the auto repair shop where Trevon worked. The small building on the outskirts of town looked run down, but inside it was bustling with activity. Mechanics were tinkering with engines, and music blared from the speakers. The owner of the shop, a heavyset man with a thick beard, introduced himself as Ezekiel Freeman. "Trevon? One of my best mechanics," he replied to Price's question. "The kid's got golden hands." "Was he working yesterday?" "Yes, until 5. Then he left, said he wanted to visit his sister." "How would you describe his emotional state lately?" Freeman scratched his beard. He was nervous. After his sister had a miscarriage, he talked about her a lot and was really upset. A couple of weeks ago, he was really gloomy. I asked him what was wrong, and he just muttered that some people shouldn't get married. "Did he mention his brother-in-law, Kieran?" "Not really, but it was clear that he didn't like him. You know how it is with relatives." Price nodded and continued his questioning. According to his colleagues, Trevon did indeed leave work around 5 p.m., but he was very agitated. One of the mechanics heard him talking on the phone and mentioned Kieran's name. After the workshop, Price decided to talk to Trevon again. He found him in a small apartment on the 2nd floor of a dilapidated building. Trevon looked exhausted, his eyes red from lack of sleep or tears. "Mr. Banks, I need to ask you a few more questions." Trevon silently led him into the apartment. It was clean, but very modestly furnished, with minimal furniture and no decorations on the walls. "You said you visited your sister every week after the miscarriage. How would you describe her relationship with her husband during that time?" Trevon sank down on the sofa and was silent for a long time before answering. "Tense. Shanti was depressed, crying all the time. Kieran seemed to be trying to support her, but I felt it was fake." "Did you suspect he was having an affair?" Trevon looked up, his eyes flashing with anger. "I didn't just suspect it, I knew it. I saw him with this woman in town a couple of times. They weren't even trying to hide. Why didn't you mention that yesterday?" "I didn't know if it had anything to do with the murder." "And now you think it does?" Trevon shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe the woman was jealous. Maybe Shanti found out about the affair and there was a fight. I don't know what happened." "Where were you yesterday between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m.? "I already told the police, at Joe's bar with my friends. We met around 5:30 and stayed there until 9. "Who can confirm that?" The bartender, and my friends, Malik and JT. Price made a note. It wouldn't be difficult to check this alibi. Mr. Banks, you have a criminal record. Trevon tensed. That was 5 years ago. I served my time and have been living an honest life ever since. I'm not accusing you. I'm just trying to understand all the circumstances. You were very upset about your sister's miscarriage. You knew about Kieran's affair. You were furious. What are you getting at? Trevon stood up, anger burning in his eyes. You think I killed Kieran out of revenge, and that I accidentally stabbed my sister at the same time? I'm considering all possibilities, Price replied calmly, including the one where the killer came for Kieran and Shanti happened to witness it. Trevon shook his head. I loved my sister. She was the only person I had in my life. I would never... His voice faltered, and he turned away. Price gave him time to calm down. One more question. Do you know a woman named Aisha Okoje? Trevon frowned. Number, who is she? A colleague of Kieran's. Possibly the same woman you saw with him. I don't know. I never spoke to her, only saw her from a distance. After talking to Trevon, Price went to Joe's bar to check his alibi. The bartender confirmed that Trevon had been there with 2 friends from around 5:30 to 8 p.m. However, one detail made the detective suspicious. According to the waitress, Trevon left the bar for about 40 minutes around 6 p.m., saying he had to make an important phone call. Back at the station, Price laid out all the evidence and statements on the table. On the one hand, Trevon had a motive to avenge his sister and the opportunity to commit the murder. He left the bar at a critical time. On the other hand, Aisha was clearly hiding something, and her earring was found in the Davises' bedroom, even though she claimed she hadn't been there recently. Price decided to check Aisha's alibi again. He called Netflix and requested information about her activity on the evening of the murder. The response should arrive within a few days. He also sent a request to the cell phone operator for the location of her phone that evening. The day was coming to an end when a lab technician popped into Price's office. Detective, we have the results on the earring found at the Davises' house. Price took the report. The earring had fingerprints matching Aisha Okoje and traces of her DNA. What's more, experts were able to determine that the earring had been lost recently, no more than 2 or 3 days ago, judging by the lack of dust and the condition of the place where it was found. This contradicted Aisha's claim that she had not been in the Davises' house since Kieran ended their relationship a month ago. Price tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. Either Aisha was lying and had been in the house shortly before the murder, or someone had planted her earring to frame her. It was almost midnight when Price finally left the station. He had 2 prime suspects, Trevon, with a motive for revenge, and Aisha, with a motive for jealousy. Both had the opportunity to commit the murder, and both had something to hide. Tomorrow, he would have to check their alibis more thoroughly and, hopefully, find new clues that would point to the killer. The morning of the 3rd day of the investigation was cloudy. Heavy clouds hung over Polson, promising rain. Detective Lamont Price sat in his office looking through photos from the crime scene. Something was bothering him, some detail was escaping his attention. There was a knock at the door, and Rita Ngozi, the medical examiner, peeked in. Good morning, Lamont. I have something interesting for you. Price gestured for her to come in. I did some additional analysis on the marks on Kieran Davis's body, Rita began, laying the photos out on the table. Remember I mentioned the lipstick marks on his neck? We compared them to the lipstick found in the Davises' bathroom. And? They're different shades. The lipstick on Kieran's neck is bright red with a distinctive chemical composition. Shanti's lipstick is a muted pink. Price rubbed his chin thoughtfully. So Kieran had contact with another woman shortly before his death. Exactly. And there's something else. We found a faint trace of lipstick on the edge of the sink in the bathroom. The same bright red shade. Apparently, someone used the sink and left a trace. Can you tell how long ago? No more than a day before the murder. The mark was fresh. This information confirmed Price's suspicions. Aisha Okoye had clearly been in the Davises' house shortly before the murder, even though she claimed otherwise. Thanks, Rita. This could be a key piece of evidence. After the medical examiner left, a young officer entered the office with a folder in his hands. Detective Price, the forensic results are in on the Davis case. Price took the folder and quickly glanced through its contents. The experts had found microfibers at the crime scene that did not match the victim's clothing. Dark blue synthetic fibers were found on the living room floor near Kiran's body and on the stair railing. The detective remembered that during their conversation at the sawmill, Aisha was wearing a dark blue work uniform. He made a note to check her wardrobe. There was another knock at the door. This time it was Officer Jackson. "Sir, we've received a response from the cell phone operator regarding the location of Aisha Okoje's phone." Price quickly scanned the document. According to the data, on the evening of the murder, between 5 o'clock and 8 o'clock p.m., Aisha's phone was not in the area of her home, as she had claimed. Instead, the signal was detected a few blocks from the Davises' house, and then the phone was turned off for 2 hours. "Interesting," Price muttered. "Jackson, get a search warrant for Aisha Okoye's apartment, and send 2 officers to the sawmill. We need to bring her in for questioning." An hour later, Price was standing in Aisha's small apartment on the second floor of an apartment building in a working-class neighborhood of Polson. Forensic technicians methodically examined the room, photographing and bagging potential evidence. "Detective!" one of the technicians called out to him. "Take a look at this!" He held out a plastic bag containing a dark blue blouse. There was a small brown stain on the sleeve. "Looks like blood," the technician commented. "And I found the second earring from the pair you were looking for. It was in a box on the dressing table." Price nodded. "Pack it up for analysis. And check if there's any red lipstick in the house." Half an hour later, they had enough evidence. The blouse with the stain, presumably blood, red lipstick of the same shade as that found on Kieran's neck and in the Davises' bathroom, a pair of gloves hidden under the mattress, and in the trash can in the yard, they found shoes wrapped hastily in newspaper with traces of blood. When Price returned to the station, Aisha Okoje was already waiting for him in the interrogation room. She looked tense, but remained outwardly calm. "Miss Okoye," Price began, sitting down opposite her. "Thank you for agreeing to talk to me again." "Did I have a choice?" she asked coldly. "Your officers took me straight from work in front of everyone. I'm afraid we have some new questions that need immediate answers." Price opened the folder containing the case files. "Yesterday, you claimed that you hadn't been to the Davies house since Kieran ended your relationship a month ago. Is that true?" Aisha looked him straight in the eye. "Yes, I already told you that. Then how do you explain the fact that your earring was found in their bedroom, and not just found, but according to the experts, lost no more than 2 or 3 days ago?" Aisha paled slightly, but her voice remained firm. "I don't know. Maybe I lost it earlier and the experts got the date wrong. What about the traces of your lipstick in their bathroom? The same bright red lipstick we just found in your apartment?" Aisha faltered. "Maybe I was there earlier than I thought. The dates may have gotten mixed up in my mind." "And your phone?" "According to your phone records on the night of the murders, you were not at home as you claimed, but near the Davises' house. Then your phone was turned off for 2 hours. That's exactly when the murders took place." Aisha's face turned to stone. "I want a lawyer." "That's your right," Price nodded. "But before we finish, let me tell you that we found a blouse with bloodstains and shoes you tried to throw away in your apartment. The blood has been sent for analysis, but I'm almost certain it belongs to Kieran or Shanti Davis. Or both." Aisha remained silent, staring at the table. Her hands, which had been resting calmly on her lap, were now clenched into fists. "Miss Okoje, the evidence suggests that you were at the Davies house on the night of the murder. What really happened there?" Aisha looked up, and Price saw a mixture of fear, anger, and despair in her eyes. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "It got out of control." "Tell me," Price said gently. "From the beginning." Aisha took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength. "I loved him," she began. "I truly loved him. And he said he loved me too. He said his marriage to Shanti had long since become a formality, that they were only living together out of habit. He promised we'd be together soon." She paused for a moment, remembering. "Then Shanti got pregnant. Kieran was shocked and said it was an accident. He started seeing me less often, but still promised we would be together. He said he couldn't leave his pregnant wife, that it would be inhumane, but as soon as the baby was born, he would find a way to leave her. Price listened silently, letting her finish. When Shanti had a miscarriage, I thought, Aisha lowered her gaze. I thought that now we could finally be together. It's terrible, I know. But I had waited so long. Her voice grew quieter. Instead, Kiran said we needed to end our relationship. That Shanti needed him, that she was depressed. He literally threw me out of his life, after all the promises, after everything we had. Aisha clenched her fists so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I tried to talk to him at work, but he avoided me. So I went to his house. It was that evening. I knew Shanti should be home, but I didn't care. I wanted to talk to him in front of her, tell her the truth about our affair, about his promises. What happened when you got there? Price asked. Kiran opened the door. He was furious, hissing at me to leave, but I pushed my way inside. Shanti was upstairs in her bedroom. We started arguing in the living room. I yelled that he had betrayed me, that he had used me and then thrown me away like a piece of trash. Aisha sighed heavily. He said I meant nothing to him, that I was just entertainment while his wife was pregnant, that he never loved me and never intended to leave Shanti. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't remember what happened next. All I remember is grabbing something heavy, I think it was a candlestick, and hitting him. He fell, and I saw blood. So much blood. Price nodded. And Shanti? Aisha covered her face with her hands. She heard the noise and came downstairs. She saw Kiran on the floor and me with the bloody candlestick. She screamed and ran to the phone. I panicked. I rushed after her and knocked her to the floor. She fought back, screaming. I didn't want to kill her, I swear. But she saw what I had done to Kiran. She would have told everyone. Aisha lowered her hands and looked at Price with a blank stare. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen. I don't remember how many times I stabbed her. I just wanted her to shut up. A heavy silence hung in the room. Price recorded her statement, trying to maintain a professional calm, although inside he was reeling from the horror of the story. What did you do then? I tried to cover my tracks. I wiped the candlestick and the knife, but I was in shock. I couldn't think straight. It wasn't until I got home that I realized there was blood on my clothes and shoes. I threw away my shoes and was going to get rid of my blouse, but I didn't have time. Aisha looked up at Price with a blank expression. I'm not a monster, detective. I just loved him too much, and he betrayed me. Price closed his notebook and looked at his watch. Aisha Okoye, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Kiran and Shanti Davis. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney. As he read her the rights, 2 officers entered the room. Aisha stared blankly ahead, offering no resistance as handcuffs were placed on her wrists. Leaving the interrogation room, Price headed for his office. He needed to finish his report on the case, but his thoughts kept returning to Aisha's confession. What drives people to cross the line? How can love turn into such a destructive obsession? He opened the folder with photos of the Davis family. Kiran and Shanti, smiling in front of a lake. Who would have known that their lives would end so tragically? One affair, one lie after another, and now 2 dead bodies and the killer's life ruined. A phone call snapped him out of his thoughts. It was Rita from the lab. Lamont, the blood analysis on Okoje's clothes has been confirmed. It's the blood of both victims. The case is closed. Thanks, Rita, Price replied. Prepare a full report by morning. Hanging up the phone, the detective leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. Outside, rain was beginning to fall, the drops tapping against the glass as if trying to say something. Price thought about how many more stories like this were unfolding right now, in this small town and across the country. How many people were on the brink, ready to cross the line because of passion, jealousy, obsession. In the evening, when all the formalities were completed, Price decided to stop by the cemetery where the bodies of Kiran and Shanti were temporarily stored awaiting burial. He rarely did this, but for some reason he felt the need to say goodbye. Perhaps because in 2 days of investigation, he had learned more about their lives than they had known about each other. The rain intensified as the detective stood in front of the morgue. He thought about how things might have been different if Kiran had been honest with Shanti, or if Aisha had been able to let go of her obsession. So many what-ifs, but in reality, there were only 2 bodies in the cold storage rooms and a murderer in a holding cell. Price knew this case would stay with him for a long time, not because of the complexity of the investigation, it was relatively straightforward, but because of the tragedy of the human relationships behind it. A secret romance that ended in miscarriage and double murder. Love that turned into obsession and hatred. Returning to his car in the pouring rain, the detective thought about how the most terrible crimes are not committed by cold-blooded maniacs, but by ordinary people who have lost control of their emotions. People who go to work in the morning, smile at their colleagues, make plans for the future, and in the evening, in a fit of rage, take the lives of others. Sitting in his car and listening to the rain drumming on the roof, Price decided that tomorrow he would visit Trevon Banks. Shanti's brother was the only one left who truly mourned the dead. Price wasn't sure he could say anything comforting, but he felt it was his duty to let him know that his sister's killer would get what he deserved. Starting the engine, the detective took one last look at the morgue. The case was closed, but questions remained. Not about who killed them, but about why people continue to hurt those they swear to love. Detective Lamont Price had no answers to those questions, and perhaps there were no answers at all.